Hi, host Eric here. I've had a few more thoughts about typing people out in the world and things you can do to help facilitate that. First, I want to mention that something that I actually picked up from EJR&D. I only watched a couple of the videos, but I was struck by that comment there, which was the ENTP is analogical in his thinking. So it's something to pay attention to. If somebody's trying to draw a link between two types of mechanism between the same mechanism in two disparate data sets. So, like the mechanism of, well, I guess a good analogy would be, I mean, a good example of how ENTPs use analogies is to say something along the lines of, well, if that were the case, then blah, 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 blah. And it'd be something that's not related topic-wise, but would appear to have the same vector. So you might say, well, I know that there are people who I can't think of anything good. I'm just like drawing a complete blank. It's funny, I used one in class earlier, but it happens usually when you're arguing a point. And let's draw an analogy between something that is in dispute, that you're disputing, and connect it to an axiom that's indisputable, and say, if we apply your logic to that thing, then come up with this ridiculous outcome. Listen for those things. Note also that ENTP is going to be, younger ones especially, if you are dealing with somebody who does this all the time, who goes, well, I like what you just said, but there's a problem with this part. This happened to me today. And this is an ENTP habit. Not all ENTPs have it, but younger ones tend to have it more. And it's a matter of how aware they are that they do it. Once they're made aware of it, then they tend to think about it more. Somebody put a comment up today about a video I have called, it's like my flagship video or something. Not intentionally, but it's just how it's turned out to be. It's called Cognitive Functions, the ENTP, yada yada yada. It's got more views than any of my other videos, which is not actually a ton of views. We're looking at 1,600 views or something like that. I mean, this guy put a comment on and said a lot of positive stuff, and then ended with, could have been more concise. I didn't make it all the way through. And that's so ENTP. That is such an ENTP thing to do. I went full throttle inclusive on him, and was like, "Welcome to Talking Fitness, people." I didn't go into too much detail about how I know you. I know what you're doing. You're doing that thing. I do that too. Yeah. I mean, he's right. It could be a little more concise. A little more concise. I've watched that video a lot. I know about it, and because I study it to see if I can figure out more about what works, what makes that one so much more popular than most of the other ones. Although it has some other popular ones now too. But it needs to be about 2 minutes shorter. But if he's, to the extent that the comment is like, well, it could have been about 10 minutes, that's actually wrong. Although it's a good enough strategy to go with. I feel you there. I might want to go take that approach as well. That video is actually almost the right length, because the bottom line, what I've come to understand about videos is they are the length that they're supposed to be when they're done right, and then what length that is, well, it's the length that it's supposed to be, So that one was supposed to be longer, and it was, and it rolls along really nicely because I sort of alternate between this rumpled suit kind of droopy kind of ENTP And then I go through a whole series of like little emotion displays and behavior displays, and then realize I'm doing it, and then go, oh, and that's what I just did right there was that thing. Well, that's going to work on all levels because I'm emoting a lot. I'm following the logical framework of the video itself. It's got a big roadmap, which is an 8-part roadmap, which is the cognitive functions. They go through all 8 of them. And then, so that's one reason why it's going to be longer. And then, additionally, I basically provide analysis, examples, displays, and include humor and stuff like that. And then, of course, most importantly, I think, or a huge factor anyway, is that there's a lot of self-deprecation on that video to counterbalance the more arrogant sounding stuff. Whenever ENTPs talk about themselves as a type, it's risky business because the things that we're talking about are things that society has afforded weight to those labels, correctly or incorrectly. They think being clever is important. Society values it, you know. They don't value it in class, in school, in practice, but they value it certainly out in the world, and the world values introverted thinking as well. Modeling and abstraction is considered somehow better, higher class or something than skill with mechanic work on a car. It shouldn't be, but it is. And I mean, the free market tells you what's valuable and what's not. The only reason that we have a lot of to the extent that the free market values philosophizing and such, is fairly limited, and you're gonna have to be a writer or a media maker of some sort to get any legitimate income from those things, and then it's probably going to be pretty small. So we've constructed this artificial, useless degree thing where people go major in philosophy because they need a degree, but they're not going to actually use the philosophy part unless they go maybe into law or something. What am I talking about? I'm fucking totally off topic, huh? Oh, right, things you can do to identify people. If they do that, what was I talking about? Oh, I got off on a tangent, did I? Probably any. Ask the following questions, it occurs to me. That you want to ask them a question like this. How do you expect you will feel about X, Y, and Z in 3 years? How do you expect you to feel about your job in a couple of years? If these questions trouble the person, they seem a little like taken aback, like, huh? And they have a little bit of pause before answering, and they seem to be processing the question by looking for something in their head or wherever it is in their body. Those are FI doms. They don't like long form questions or long projecting questions. They ask them to consider how they're going to be or what's going to happen or what they want a couple years from now. And what's interesting here is if you would ask the same question of a thinker, how do you think you'll feel about this in a couple of years? Because of the way we use language and the way we use feel to mean think a lot of times, or vice versa, then they're not going to say, well, I don't know how I'm going to feel about it, but this is what I think about it. They're going to just say something like this. Well, I mean, I suspect I'll be quite happy about it. I anticipate continued progression. We see a nice linear path here. I'm continuing to improve, and I would expect that I'll see ongoing promotion and advancement. In a couple of years, I'll probably be making more money. I would expect to be happy about it. They're answering the question, I expect to be happy is the emotion. It's a very blah emotion. It's like not very specific. But really, almost all those words are about predictions about what's going to happen. And this is why the FI Dom is so troubled by it. They can't predict their feelings. They can't predict them because feelings aren't predictable. How am I going to feel about something in 2 years? Who the hell knows? Right? So, and then another thing you could do, another question, this is the last thing I want to do for this video. Another question you can ask that can be informative. It's a little scenario type of thing. If you say this, you ask them a question where they don't have enough information to give any kind of a meaningful answer. So you say, hey, if you walked into a room and you saw there are two people in there, Bob and Mary. Mary's crying, head in her hands, and Bob is standing nearby with his arms folded. And then you get whooshed out of the room right away. What happened? What caused that? How people respond to that is going to be very informative, and it's going to be informative in the pre-examination part. So people think when you ask a question like that you're interested in the answer. I'm not interested in the answer at all. I'm interested in how they approach a question like that where they don't get enough information. So, and any person will probably, first thing will say, well, it's impossible to tell. There's not enough information. It's a bad question. Any person will probably say that right away, first thing, before they dig into it. However, if I were to answer it, because they're not going to just not answer the question. Then they'll get into the TI stuff. They'll say, well, give me more data. Let me see what I got. A TI person will start asking questions right away. Well, okay, how old were they? How many questions can I ask? They ask questions about what they can ask as well. Now, I don't know how the FE, or I don't know how the other types would exactly respond to that. But there's a follow-up question I think is interesting as well, which is, if you had to make up a story about that, and your purpose was to make up a story that that really revealed as much as possible about the people you're dealing with, but didn't tell anything about them beyond the scope of the thing that resulted in their crime, can you tell me that story? Now, you can note how high T is in the stack by how much they try to process that before they start. So you can say, if you're going to make up a story that explained that crime in a way that revealed a lot about the nature of the characters, but did not reference anything that happened outside of the scene that caused the crime, and the scene was of limited time scope, under 15 minutes, give me a possible story you might come up with, maybe two possible stories you might come up with, and why you prefer one, something like that. Now what you've done is you set too many conditions at the beginning. You've said, if you were to have some reason, let's say a motivation to make up the story as well as you could. So then you're using this motivational vector there. Ideally, I didn't say it in the example, but throw a motivation in there. And then you say, and you add some qualifiers. You say, you have to explain how the scene that caused this crime. So you're narrowing what exactly they're describing at this point a little bit. But you can't reference anything the characters do or say or are or anything outside of that scene. And yet you're supposed to reveal as much about the characters' natures or personalities as you can in the story without talking about anything outside the 15-minute period. Now this is a very challenging assignment because in order for the fight to consume only things that are not outside of that room in that moment, you're going to have to start with like Mary stepped on his toe or something. But you see, by adding all those vectors, you make it really complicated to think about, because now you're not just coming up with some reason that might reveal what you actually think is the default reason why people get into conflict like that, but you have to come up with that reason that meets certain criteria that are totally separate from that, namely that the two characters' narratives can't extend beyond the time boundaries of the setting. And naturally you're going to have people are not going to understand what you mean the first time you say that. You're going to ask questions. You're going to explain it. When people are asking questions, you're giving explanations. Try ideally to make them pull it out of you. So, they ask questions, give them a simple answer that doesn't really explain as much as it should, and let them ask the follow-up questions to see how far down the path they chase it. Keeping in mind, the higher T is in the stack, whether it's TE or TI, I think, the higher that is in the stack, the more they're going to find this process interesting, and the more they're going to want to make sure they have all the qualifying qualifiers, like the details of the story. Anyway, that's about 15 minutes. That is a second video on typing people in the real world. I'm going to continue making these. Interesting topic. I'm thinking about it a lot, and different tricks that I do without really thinking about them, or that I'd like to try now that I'm thinking about them. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening.